Hilda, thanks so much for joining us here on APTN InFocus. So we're looking at the annual day to honor MMIWG 2S and their families and the marches and rallies that happen this time of year. You're not just an advocate, but also a family member. What are you thinking about this time of year?
I think, for me, I'm honoring and remember all those, that we've lost tragically to homicide. And, for those who are missing, we're carrying them in our hearts during this time. But also to really amplify the need for action, so that we can put an end to this national crisis that is, continuing, and numbers are going up at alarming rates. So it's a day of, for me, it's a day of remembering and honoring, but also a day for calling for action.
Now, Hilda, how have you been able to turn your frustration and maybe anger into action?
I think, for me, turning my frustration and anger, on the tragic loss of my sister and, my niece and my cousin as well, is to really amplify their voices, and to know that their voices have not been silenced, and to really focus on, the systemic and structural failures that have contributed to the loss of human lives, especially Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, and to focus on accountability, but also to focus on prevention, on what does prevention look like, what could ultimately save the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, and what does that look like, and to ensure that, the voices of grassroots people are central in the process, the ones who are being directly impacted on a daily basis, to ensure that their voices are included and central, and to navigate spaces and opportunities for that to occur. So for me, and that's how I've turned my anger and frustration into, to moving forward and healing, as well as to know that I'm doing my part as someone who's directly impacted, to create pathways for safety and security. And for, and standing in my truth as well, if we can't truth tell, a lot is not going to change. So it's really critical that, we stand in our truth as advocates championing change.
And Hilda, I'd mentioned there's all these important marches and memorials and rallies being held. Why is it still very important that these are held to honor this day?
It's a significant reminder to Canada and to institutions, agencies, and all Canadians that, that this is real, this is ongoing, this is a national crisis, and we need to respond and respond adequately. It's fine to attend the marches, but, families and survivors and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people are exhausted from, fighting a fight for survival and for safety. It's time that, all Canadians and all governments take action, and to ensure that action, if we feel the impact on the ground, and that there's accountability for any funding that is going out to organizations who are providing those supports and those resources, and that those organizations are safe, they're safe for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people to access supports and resources. This is why it's critical that any organization who is providing, supports and resources for impacted family members and survivors of gender-based violence are independent and not governed under any political structures.
Well, and Hilda, we're 4 years past the national inquiry now, or it's been almost 4 years, I guess, this year. How has the progress been in your view?
I think, in my view, in my advocate hat, but also, in my national role, there has been some progress. We've never seen the levels of commitment that has occurred from this government, but we know that that's not enough. We need to ensure that, that there's funding available, and that funding is reaching, our communities. It's not getting caught up in bureaucracy. It's not getting caught up in political organizations. That we need to ensure that money is reaching our community members on the ground, whether it be in urban settings or in First Nation and remote and isolated communities. So there has to be mechanisms to allow for, that opportunity to reach those who desperately need support, and to really put a huge focus on prevention, healing, and wellness, and to also take a global lens to the issues and the root causes of gender-based violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. There has to be a multi-pronged approach, to ensure that there's impact.
So then, is that still what needs to be done in your view? What would you make a priority here as we move forward?
I think for me, as an Indigenous woman, a priority for us, is to have our basic human rights met, because that's not happening right now. We have multiple priorities that need immediate attention. So it's difficult to say, we need secure housing, we need food security, we need economic opportunities, we need educational opportunities, we need access to quality healthcare, access to mental health services, access to addiction services. We have such great needs, so it's hard to supersede one need over another. That's why I really highlight that it has to be a wraparound approach, and it has to be Indigenous-led, rooted in our Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We cannot, accept prescriptive approach from, colonial mechanisms, that have oppressed us previously.
Mm-hmm. And Hilda, this is all set against the current news of the 4 Indigenous women murdered in Winnipeg and the backdrop of what's happening in Prince George, British Columbia as well. And we hear so many stories all the time. Well, why do you think this keeps happening? I know you mentioned a few of the causes, but why do you think this keeps happening?
To be brutally honest, it's happening as a result of the misogyny and the patriarchy that exists in this country. And how our lives are devalued as Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. Not to knock my non-Indigenous sisters, but if we were white women, we would definitely not be in this type of situation. Yeah. I value all women equally, but there is inequity when it comes to government responses to the violence being experienced by Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. Mm-hmm. I think we need to call it what it is. It's racism. Racism is killing us. Racism is oppressing us. Racism is perpetuating the violence that we're experiencing.
And Hilda, as I just mentioned, we've heard a lot about the RCMP and the violence against Indigenous women and girls recently in Prince George. How does policing fit into what we're talking about here?
Well, policing is a weapon that is used by the Canadian state. We've seen it used against our people, when we look at the 60 Scoop Indian residential school, the child welfare system, and now when, Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people are seeking justice or seeking protection, it's not there. And they're perpetuating violence, and we're being violated by an agency that is supposed to protect us and that, we should trust, but that's not happening. We don't trust the police. We've seen, multiple incidents of not only one policing agency in this country, it's happening in multiple provinces and territories as well. So as an Indigenous woman, we don't trust the police.
Mm-hmm. So then how, I guess, on top of that, Hilda, how do we sort of change that narrative in a sense as well?
I think it's about creating accountability mechanisms, to ensure that there's Indigenous representation on those accountability mechanisms. And if we develop Indigenous police forces, there also has to be accountability mechanisms, for our safety and security as well. Not only do we experience violence outside of our communities, we're experiencing violence at alarming rates within our communities as well. This is why I highlight the critical need for supports, to be provided directly to our, First Nation communities as well for our safety and security.
Well, Hilda, we certainly appreciate the time. This is something that we will be watching as it unfolds and as it develops, and we certainly appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and insights into this. So thank you very much, Miigwech.
Yep, thank you.